Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our latest PA Schools Work Lunch and Learn webinar. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. And as I see folks that are logging in and connecting to audio. My name is Sean Neuer with PA Schools Work. And today we're here to talk about Governor Shapiro's budget proposal and what it means for Pennsylvania's 1.7 million public school students. We're going to take a closer look at the governor's proposal for the 2026-27 fiscal year, talk about how it moves us a little bit closer to fulfilling our constitutional obligation to fund public education and what it means for communities in every corner of Pennsylvania, urban, suburban, and rural. We are fortunate to have two phenomenal speakers with us today to walk us through this. Donna Cooper, who's the Executive Director of Children First. Donna's going to provide some big picture context and frame why this budget matters so much at a moment like this. And we have Dan Urevick-Ackelsberg, who's the Senior Attorney at the Public Interest Law Center. He's going to talk to us about the backstory with the school funding lawsuit in Pennsylvania, what adequacy actually means, and then go into some specifics about what Governor Shapiro's proposal would mean for Pennsylvania school districts. So a couple things quickly before I turn it over to Donna. We are recording this webinar, and we'll make sure that everybody gets a link to that recording when we are done this afternoon. Also, at the end, we're going to take questions. You can ask your question two ways. One is you can click the raise your hand button and we can unmute you so you can ask your question out loud. Sometimes that's easier, to have a back and forth and ask follow-up questions. But if you're unable to do that, or you would rather do it this way, you can also type your question in the Q&A dialog box or in the chat, and we will read that question out to our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over first to Donna Cooper from Children First.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for being here. There's a lot on your plate. There's a lot going on in the world. And I think that all of us at PA Schools Work know that the world's going to be a better place when every kid in Pennsylvania can be guaranteed a quality education no matter where they live, which is why we do this work together. And, as we kick this off this year, 2026, with Josh Shapiro's budget proposal, I want to say that I have been doing this work, and the Public Interest Law Center has been a partner in that work for 25 years. And for those of you who wonder, can things change? We're going to show you today that things have changed pretty dramatically. Now, it didn't take a quarter century to make that happen, but the groundwork that we've laid together, if you are a school advocate in Pennsylvania, if you've been a reporter reporting on school funding issues in Pennsylvania, it's taken a long time to educate people about the fact that Pennsylvania has one of the most disparate educational systems in the country, where a child can live 1 mile from another child and be in a school district that has 100% more money than the one that the child is coming from. So we have to solve for that. And we're so grateful that the Public Interest Law Center and the Education Law Center championed a lawsuit that was, started almost 15 years ago now, maybe 14, and finally was decided by the state's court that said, in fact, in Pennsylvania, our lawmakers are not living up to their constitutional obligation to guarantee that every child, regardless of where they live, gets a quality education. And a Republican judge on Pennsylvania's courts, highest court, said, we got to do better. And our legislature responded. The House and the Senate reached an agreement on a new funding system, and we are now several years into that funding system. And this budget that the governor proposed continues to move us towards the remedy that the court ordered, which is the state must do more to solve for the gap between those that are wealthy and those who are poor in our school districts and students. So first of all, advocacy works. Being involved in a campaign like PA Schools Work works. And it's based, and what we want to do today is tell you what's in the governor's budget so that you have the confidence to be able to say that you want to talk to your state lawmakers about advocating for what's being proposed. Now, by what's being proposed doesn't mean we solve the problem, but we make another big leap forward this year. And we have many months before that becomes actualized. So talking with you today is setting the stage for you to be prepared to be an advocate, for you as a reporter to be prepared to write in detail about what's being proposed, so that over the next several months at the House and Senate appropriation hearings, as the budget negotiations go along, and perhaps by June 30th, there is an agreement that at least funds what the governor has put on the table and perhaps more. Because when we meet what the governor has proposed, and by the way, this isn't partisan, any governor that would have proposed what this governor proposed, we would be advocating to build upon. And Dan's going to walk through the details of that. But just again, understand that when this budget proposal is enacted, we'll begin to close the gap between the low wealth school districts and the high wealth school districts, not by restraining what high wealth school districts have to spend, but bringing up the floor so the kids that are in communities that can't offer them an adequate education because their community is too poor, have a good shot in life. And I want to tell you that this is already having an impact. We're a couple years in already on this new school funding formula that happened as a result of the lawsuit. And really exciting things are happening. So high school kids want more access to career tech ed. And we see that school districts are using their new money, the new money they get, which is called adequacy supplement or the ready to learn block grant. It's already expanding access to career tech ed. It's expanding access to full day kindergarten. It's reducing class size. It's upgrading science and math curricula and literacy curricula. It's ensuring that school districts can balance their budget and maintain their charter school tuition rates. And so, this is a really important new revenue source for school districts that avoids cuts, because some school districts in the past have had to cut in order to pay charters that are growing in their district, and enables them to continue and expand things we know will boost student achievement. And so if you're here today because you want to be part of boosting student achievement by reducing class size, getting full day kindergarten, improving literacy and math outcomes, career tech ed, and protecting the critical services for children with special ed, you're in the right place, because the adequacy funds that have been put on the table are making that possible in more than 300 school districts that are receiving those funds. Now, there are other funds that Dan will talk about that also contribute to that. But we are very focused today on the fact that we're trying to close the gap between the low wealth and the high wealth districts by bringing up the floor. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the money that does that, called the adequacy supplement, and it's also known as the ready to learn block grant. So there's a lot at stake. This is a big year. We have a gubernatorial election. So Governor Shapiro is running unopposed in the primary, and it looks like the Republican candidate, Treasurer Stacey Garrity, will run unopposed in her primary. And then they're going to battle it out in November. And so this is a big year for education, because we need this debate to be very loud and very positive in support of public education, because we need those candidates who are running to feel buoyed by a budget agreement that at a minimum invests what Governor Shapiro has proposed. And be clear that the districts that receive this money, the adequacy districts, are rural, suburban, and urban. There's more than 300 of them. And so depending on what county you live in, if you go to the PA Schools Work website, and John will put the link in the website, there are fact sheets, and you can see how school districts in your county that are low-income school districts serving low-wealth children, how much money they're getting in the funds that have already been put on the table. And very soon you'll see fact sheets that talk about what the new money will mean. And it's important that you think about, this is in my community, and I need to communicate to my lawmakers, or if I'm a reporter, I need to write about the concrete impact that the adequacy supplement's having in my community, in a rural community, in a small suburban community that might be in a community of low wealth suburbs, and in urban school districts. So this is a one-size-fits-all solution for the districts that for years have not been able to generate sufficient funds locally to offer a quality education. We have a slogan in this campaign called Finish the Job. So the court said, you lawmakers, you need to make sure you solve this disparity. And so this year will be another year forward in our work to finish the job, where we invest in the future of our students, where we give our educators the supports they need, and we work in a nonpartisan manner to build support, because our kids, they aren't Democrats or Republicans or independents. They are the future, and they need to go to schools that are that are prepared and supported enough to prepare them for a real world education that prepares them for a great future. So we're going to go a little bit more into the details of this right now, and then we're going to come back and answer your questions, but then also talk about what you can do. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dan Ackelsberg, and he's going to walk you through some of the granular details. Take notes, but we're also going to post this so you'll get it.
Thanks, Donna. And let me just share my screen for folks. Give me 1 second. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks, Donna, for setting the table so well. And as Donna said, I am a senior attorney at the Public Interest Law Center in Philadelphia, with my colleagues here and with our co-counsel at the Education Law Center of PA. We were the lawyers that brought and won the lawsuit, which I'm going to talk about, which ties into the adequacy funding that Donna mentioned. But I want to just start with where I'm going to finish, which is to say that I'm going to talk about the lawsuit and sort of the remedy that's come from that is you can't actually leave this to the lawyers. If you care about the things that Donna mentioned, ultimately, if the goal here is to get resources to the school districts that need it most, you can't just leave it up to us. That's not how it works. If we actually want a real solution, the path that we are on that I'm going to talk to you about, we really need everyone to get involved. I will just skip through these. Sorry, the headlines. So Donna mentioned this lawsuit. It was actually 2014. A lawsuit was filed, and it was filed in the wake of really horrible state budget cuts that had happened under then Governor Corbett. But also within a broader context of decades of failure to adequately fund public education. Pennsylvania's constitution, our state constitution, like just about every state, has an education clause in it. Ours says the General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education to serve the needs of the Commonwealth. What this lawsuit alleged, and what we eventually proved, is that the Commonwealth was failing to live up to that duty. Again, these school districts from all across Pennsylvania brought this case saying that the way that we were funding schools was depriving them of their ability to provide their kids with a thorough and efficient education. And these are the school districts and the organizations that brought it. And the only thing I want to stress to you is that it was really a cross section of districts all across the Commonwealth. Right, from Greater Johnstown in Cambria County to Wilkes-Barre in Luzerne, Shenandoah in Schuylkill County, as well as a statewide organization, the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools, and a statewide organization, the NAACP of PA, along with parents. It's really a cross section. Brought the lawsuit because in Pennsylvania there are these longstanding problems. Critical among them is that first, in Pennsylvania, historically, there was no goal of actually fully funding public schools. It's not like each year the House and Senate Appropriations Committees met and said, okay, what do our schools actually need to accomplish a goal? Instead, they largely gave school districts what they had the year before, plus 1% or 3% or whatever, depending on that year. But that was a really critical question that was lacking. There was no question of what do schools actually need to accomplish a goal, and are we actually going to give it to them? We also had a relatively low contribution to public education. Most of our funding was not based on a formula, on a rational formula at least. And this inadequate state funding led to these really gross inequities between districts. When you put it all together, what you had is a system where low wealth communities needed the most, They have the students with the highest needs. They try the hardest. They have the highest relative tax rates. And despite that, they have the least. So we had this long process to get to trial. The case was filed in 2014, and yada, 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 about 9 years, we won. In 2013, after a 4-month trial, our system of school funding was declared unconstitutional. All right. And so I just want to spend with just a few minutes on what that decision held. And again, this is about a 90-second recap of a 786-page decision. So needless to say, there's a lot more detail I could get into. But the first thing is that the court had to, for the first time in Pennsylvania history, define what that thorough and efficient clause actually entitles each child to. So what the court said is that the education clause requires every student to have a meaningful opportunity to succeed academically, socially, and civically. And that explained what that meant. That meant that all students have access to a comprehensive, effective, and contemporary system of public education. That's what the education clause requires, that every child in the Commonwealth have access to a comprehensive, effective, and contemporary system of public education. The court then spent hundreds of pages detailing what that meant. And what that meant is the things that we all know to be true, right? Sufficiently small class sizes, tutors when a kid needs a tutor, counselors, good facilities, up-to-date technology and textbooks, the things that we all understand are the bedrock of a good public education system. But the court concluded that low-wealth districts can't actually give their kids that kind of education because we have a system that is heavily dependent on local taxes, a funding formula that doesn't adequately take into account those students' needs. And as a result, students in low-wealth districts don't have the educational resources needed to prepare them to succeed academically, socially, or civically. So again, 786-page decision. There was a lot more there. But the court then said, okay, I'm going to give the people that are responsible for fixing the system, the respondents in the lawsuit, which were the executive and legislative branches, the first chance to fix this, working in conjunction with the petitioners, us, to devise a remedy to actually fix this system. And so we got to work. In 2023, there was something called, or 2024, there was something called the Basic Education Funding Commission. And in July of 2024, huge bipartisan majorities of the House and Senate, overwhelming majorities, passed a law which finally requires the Commonwealth to do the thing that has often been lacking, actually determine what is the adequate funding that each school district needs. It's a pretty straightforward way they do it. They simply looked at what successful Pennsylvania schools are spending on the needs of their students, took out the highest spending districts, and then gave a reasonably conservative estimate, just based on what those schools are spending, of what it would take to give every student that same level of opportunity. And they now calculate district by district, what is our adequacy target? What do we need to get to? What is the goal for every school district in the Commonwealth? So you can go right on PDE's website now and see that the Commonwealth has calculated.
Department of Education.
Thank you. The Pennsylvania Department of Education's website, and see what is the actual, what is the adequacy gap that the Commonwealth has calculated pursuant to this bipartisan legislation for every district. And putting it all together, what you see is widespread funding inadequacy. There's bipartisan agreement in that law of widespread funding inadequacy. How wide? A $4.8 billion shortfall when the law was passed 2 years ago. There are 364 districts that have an adequacy gap of some kind, again, as of the time this was passed. Districts with a giant shortfall, more than $5,000 per student, represent 421,000 students. That's a quarter of all Pennsylvania students are in school districts with a shortfall of more than $5,000 per kid. The median shortfall is about $3,000 per student. And also, 82% of Black students, 85% of Latino students attend inadequately funded schools. The same goes for low-income students. Really, again, the kids that are often get the short end of the stick, well, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's own law agrees that they do. Right? These are just some of the districts with the largest shortfalls in the Commonwealth. And again, I just want to emphasize how much this is actually a cross-section of Pennsylvania, right? This is per student the biggest shortfalls. And what you see is 2 school districts in Cranberry County, 1 school district in Allegheny County, Luzerne, Berks, Lebanon. So it's everyone, right? This is not a Philadelphia problem. This is not an eastern half of the state problem. This is not an urban problem. This is not a rural problem. It's an everyone problem. So we passed that law, which named this, and then in 2024, the state got to work and enacted the first installment of that adequacy shortfall, right? So it was about $500 million to begin to fill that $4.8 billion gap. It was about 1/9 of the funding. So this was what was passed in 2025. It was sort of one step towards filling that gap. At the same time, in 24-25, the state also passed pretty significant increases in basic education funding. That line item that is our biggest source of funding for public schools, which goes to every district, and which is really important to help keep up with costs. It's important for districts with a shortfall and without a shortfall. You need to be able to keep up with your growing costs. Labor costs go up every year, for example. But I said before that the court had determined what the education system requires, right? That it requires a certain level of inputs. That the court said, what that comprehensive effective education means is that students need to have access to the right amount of courses and curriculum and staff and facilities and instrumentalities of learning, the things that funding pays for. And so, as Donna said, we can now tell in year 1 what that funding paid for. And it paid for things like full-day kindergarten and STEM and CTE and reducing class size in the early grades. Again, it paid for the things that we all know work for kids. After it passed, the governor said, we've done one bucket of this, but we know that was the opening round, and we have many, many more rounds to go. Now, if you were following Pennsylvania politics, or if you were in a school district, you know that last year we had this giant budget standoff. But eventually, when the smoke cleared in 2025, they did it again, right? They actually slightly increased adequacy funding for a way we don't really need to get into. Again, what you really need to know is about another 1/9 of the funding was added to the pie. So we sort of went from 1/9 of funding, 1 step out of 9, to 2 steps accomplished out of 9. We began again, we're on this slow march towards adequately funding our schools, which brings us to this year, right? So the governor gave his budget address earlier this month, and what he proposed is step 3 for adequacy funding, right? To do exactly what they did last year. Right? We've made a commitment to our kids. We've passed bipartisan legislation, which says our schools are really underfunded. We're going to keep doing that we're going to keep taking that sort of march towards adequacy. Right? So again, another $500 million approximately in funding, according to that adequacy formula, the Ready to Learn block grant that Donna had talked about, which pays for things like early childhood education, K-3 class size reduction, and on and on. So, one way to think about this is in 24 and 25 together, we've gotten about 22% of the way there. If we accomplish 26 and 27, we'll get about 33% of the way there. And there's sort of 2 ways to look at it. First of all, that's far too slow, right? As someone who has both a child who goes to one of these underfunded schools and also helped litigate this case, it's far too slow. My daughter started kindergarten this year. At this pace, she'll be in 7th grade before her school is adequately funded. That's unacceptable. That's just simply unacceptable. But also true is that we have made really a significant progress. And if we keep on this path, we can potentially transform our public education system. And that's what the governor, if you watch his budget address, what he really committed to doing is that we're going to keep living up to our constitutional obligation. One thing, though, that I want to mention is Donna talked about using the governor's budget proposal as a starting point And there really is one thing that I want to highlight here. So in 24-25, basic education funding, which goes to all 500 school districts, was $285 million. Last year, it was $105 million. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide. You see at the bottom, there's cyber charter savings. At the same time, the state has been enacting various ways to help school districts deal with rising cyber charter costs. And so the state has been enacting those too and helping with inflationary costs. But $105 million is below the level of inflation. And what the state has proposed for 26-27 is even less than that. And so if we don't want to create a new class of underfunded districts, or if we don't want to force school districts to use that adequacy funding, which is designed to add money to your school, add programs to your school, hire new teachers, right? Purchase new curriculum, lower your class sizes, then we have to make sure that we're not underfunding these other line items, because then districts will be forced to rob Peter to pay Paul. So as we're going through this budget season, it's really important that adequacy is sort of like this, is stored away. It's this lockbox. It's not going to change. We're not going to, I mean, it should increase, but it's certainly not going to decrease. But at the same time, we also bring up these the other line items that help districts keep up with their costs. That's the only way this can ultimately work. And if we do that and we take this through completion, not just this year, but year after year, then we will not have a system that has no goal of fully funding schools. That will be gone. We will not have a low state contribution. We will not have most of our funding not based on a formula. We will not have these gross inequities. And we will not have a situation where low-wealth communities need the most, try the hardest, and have the least. It's a tough thing to do. I'm not saying this is easy. It's going to require all of you to help us get there. When the case concluded, the court acknowledged that this was a tough thing to do, that this was not easy. We're talking about billions of dollars, right? This is not simply changing a line in a law. We actually have to appropriate billions of dollars and then make it work for kids. And what the court said, quoting from John F. Kennedy, is that we try to do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Because the goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. Right? The goal here is pretty simple. The goal is that when a 5-year-old walks into a classroom in Johnstown or in Philadelphia or in anywhere in between, that a superintendent can assess the needs of that child and then meet those needs. If that kid needs a counselor to give a little extra support, you make sure that kid has access to a counselor. If they need access to a tutor, you give them access to a tutor. If they need small class sizes, they get that small class size. That's at heart what this is really about. If that is important to you, which I hope it is since you're on this webinar, we really need to get you involved. So I'm going to finish where I started. You cannot leave this up to the lawyers. The reason why we actually had a remedy enacted into law with wide bipartisan majorities is there was an outcry from the public. There were people like Children First, like PA Schools Work, to get together and force the state legislature to live up to their constitutional duty. So I'm going to turn it back over with that to Donna, who can talk about the ways that you can get involved and you can be part of this solution.
John, do you want to take questions first, or should I go ahead and do that?
Yeah. So Donna, why don't we can briefly, and I'm happy to, I can let folks know what's here, and then we'll do questions. Just very quickly, a few tangible ways you can get involved and things
I had that, John. I want to walk through. We don't want to do questions first.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me remind folks how they can ask questions. So you can either click the button to raise your hand, and we can unmute you, or you can type your question in the Q&A dialogue box. So Donna, do you want to go ahead while we wait and see if we can accumulate some questions?
So one of the things that's really important that Dan presented at the end was that school districts can choose how to use these funds to meet the needs of their students. In Pennsylvania, we have a very strong tradition of local control. Your school board makes a decision and your superintendent on what your students need. What this lawsuit and these new funds, these adequacy funds enable, is they give schools more choice, right? So a Lowell school district in the past didn't have the option to provide a tutor. Now they begin to exercise the same choices in the interest of their students as higher wealth school districts. So it's really important to understand that this is putting in the hands of your school district and your superintendent the resources to make the best decisions on how to educate their children. Now, the state legislature didn't hand a blank check. They were very clear to say it needs to be research-based. You need to make decisions on things that are actually going to boost student achievement. So as Dan talked about and I talked about, full day kindergarten, improving math and literacy instruction, tutoring, enabling kids to get upgraded curricula. These are things we know boost student achievement, reducing class size. So now school districts can make that choice. So it's important that when you think about how you engage or how you report on this as a reporter, that you are emphasizing the fact that the resources that the lawmakers are making available increase the choice that children, superintendents, school board members, and parents have in terms of supporting a quality education locally. Now, we have several ways that you can get involved. The first is you can see we're having what we call an advocacy day for adequacy on May 6th in Harrisburg. And maybe you can get there and join us. And you'll get a link after this webinar of how to do that. We'd love a big showing. We'd love to have hundreds of people in the Capitol from all across the state making the very case that we're making today, that our kids can't wait. They need lawmakers to act this year. And politics and partisanship cannot be used as an excuse for maintaining an inequitable education funding system. Every kid deserves a world-class education. You could go to Harrisburg any day you want. You could call up your state senator, your state representative. After this webinar, you'll get contact information and say, I really want you to act in support of the goals of the Pennsylvania PA Schools Work Campaign, because these are the right goals for the kids of the Commonwealth. So you don't need to wait till May 6th to talk to your lawmaker. If you're active in your community and you're seeing your lawmakers, tell them you were at this webinar. Tell them you want that, at least the governor's proposal to pass. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, Democrats and Republicans can build on that. If you are on your school board, invite your state lawmakers to a meeting and ask them how they're going to approach this year's budget and where do they think on the importance of boosting the adequacy funds and making sure school districts have the resources that are needed. If you work for a school district right now and you are receiving adequacy funds, make sure your lawmaker, state and Senate and state house, know how those funds are improving the quality of education for kids right now, for the 2 years that you've already gotten that money, that 22%. Don't wait, make that call, tell that story, send that picture now. We are going to need lots of people to be in Harrisburg on May 6th. We're going to need people to be there every week of June. And if you can't get to Harrisburg, be sure to be in communication with your lawmaker, and we'll give you tools and tips to do that. One of the things I want to show you is I want to make sure that you are familiar with how the resources of the PA Schools Work Campaign are organized. And so I'm going to take 1 second to share my screen. And John's going to put a link to this in the chat. So this is the Scranton School District. And the Scranton School District, for the 22% of funds that they've already gotten, has gotten $16 million. That's huge, believe me, in Scranton. And they can tell you how dire the situation is. But they're still owed $60 million. Now this year, they might get another $16 million. That would be great. So we're driving down what they're owed. But look, this school district has 14% of its kids coming in not speaking English. Three-quarters of the kids or more, 75% or more, are low income. They have a quarter of their kids with special ed needs. The funds that the adequacy fund enable and the basic education funding and and special education funding, these resources make it possible to do the extra effort and make the choices that the superintendents know are needed to give every kid there a quality education. So you'll get a link and you can pull up. If you live in an adequacy school district, you'll be able to see a fact sheet just like this to tell you what's coming to your district. Now, in a couple weeks, we'll have new fact sheets, and they will reflect what the governor's budget proposal will offer on top of this. So you're outfitted with the tools you need to become an effective advocate making the case for these resources. And so, we can't do this alone. There are many organizations in PA Schools work: Education Voters, 412 Justice, Pennsylvania Policy Center, Children First, Ed Law Center, Public Interest Law Center, CLAMO, NEPA, Northeast Together, the Pennsylvania Association for Rural and Small Schools. So there's and the Keystone Research Center. There's a lot of organizations that are working together to make this proposal as the floor that gets passed, hopefully larger than this. We need you to help us make that happen. We can tell, I told you at the beginning, we've made extraordinary progress. And Dan showed you 3 years of significant increases on public education funding, including reforms to how cyber schools are paid. These resources improve our schools, and we need your help to secure them this year. And so with that, we'll take questions, and I'm happy to talk to you about engagement or the details.
Thanks, Donna. I've also put our contact information in the chat. Obviously, like Donna alluded to, we'll send a follow-up email to everybody this afternoon with all of these resources that we talked about, a recording of the webinar, the slide deck, our contact information, but just noting that there's contact info for follow-up afterwards in the chat as well. A question, does the 9-year timeline, Dan, that you talked about, account for continuing increases in expenses for school districts?
Great
Inflation.
question.
Yeah.
Does the 9-year timeline have inflation built into it? And no, the answer is it doesn't. And so there will be a question as we get to the end. Okay, well, if you're not accounting, $4.8 billion after 9 years is a lot less than $4.8 billion today. But it's also why it's really critical, forgetting that that $4.8 billion inflation, is that we at minimum start to keep up with the inflation of basic education funding, of all the other things that are growing, because the premise of the adequacy funding is it's built upon essentially what you had 2 years ago. It's to add. So that's why, it's really important starting now to keep up with inflation so that districts aren't losing the impact of adequacy funding by having to fill in for other increasing costs.
All right. So 2 questions. I'm going to do my best to paraphrase because they're very good and long questions. This comes from a legislative staffer in Chester County who's also a school board member in Coatesville. So part 1 is, can we address the relative lack of investment in special ed funding as those costs obviously continue to rise for school districts? So that's paraphrase part 1. And then part 2, assuming we close the adequacy gap, would we be looking to have all funds allocated through BEF and SCF? Dan, maybe we can talk a little bit about what happens to the sort of the adequacy fund. This is really a question about setting a new floor sort of year to year. So can you maybe talk a little bit about that? So special ed, and then what happens after we, knock on wood, close that gap, and what does the new floor look like for districts?
Sure. So to start, obviously, special education really growing part of school district budgets. Special education students were part of that calculation that gets to the adequacy funding to start. So it was based upon all the things that we know cost, all that we know that students bring with them on a broad level that will inevitably increase costs for school districts. So that we know that as a general matter, it takes more to educate kids in poverty, kids learning English, and kids with disabilities, right? They often need more services. And so the $4.8 billion was looking at all of those needs, and it's really intended to be sort of all inclusive of both of those things. But like basic education funding, we have to at least keep up with that base level, or we're again just robbing Peter to pay Paul. So the answer is like we have to keep up with our special education costs and special education line item, but also the adequacy funding had in there a school district special education needs. That's the first. The second thing is what happens to the money. So each year, the school district sort of takes one step up, and the law says, okay, that's now added to your foundation. And then the next year, it's added to your, you can take another step up, and that's added to your foundation. And year three, it's added to your foundation. And so at the end of this, at the end of the 9-year process, there will be $4.8 billion more through what's called the Ready to Learn block grant. And school districts will essentially be able to count on that and plan on that each year. So as envisioned, the point of it is to have some stability where school districts know they can count on it because they have to be able to count on it so that they can actually invest and build programs. You can't build programs if it's a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year program. You have to staff up. Pennsylvania has to staff up. We need more teachers in the pipeline, for example. And so it's intended to be a sort of stable investment in schools that we know need it.
Just a reminder, you can type your question in that Q&A dialog box, or you can click the raise your hand button and ask your question that way. Donna, a question for you, because you have so much experience with this challenge. This is some complicated stuff for people who are not steeped in the details. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach talking about the importance of the adequacy funding in particular to folks who are a more general audience, right? People who want maybe to be helpful advocates, but they sort of feel like there's that barrier to entry because it is difficult to sort of grasp the best way to talk to other people about that, to maybe if they're going to go do a constituent meeting with their lawmakers, how best to underscore the importance of adequacy funding in those scenarios. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Look, one of the things that I hope everybody understands is that there's something that is a consensus in Pennsylvania, proven by polling year after year, which is the citizens of the state abhor the disparity between wealthy and low-income school districts. They believe that the quality of a child's education should not be dependent on a zip code, the zip code in which they live. And so understanding that you can say that sentence every day, and you will have the support of Republicans and Democrats and the citizens who are polled in the state. That's number one. The quality of no child's education should be dependent on the zip code in which they live. And yet Pennsylvania's funding system makes that a reality. The only way to solve for that is by advancing at a minimum the proposal that the governor's put forward. That ensures that the legislature is complying with the lawsuit. And so there are like 4 points that are very simple for which you will not get much dispute. Now, people will say, how do we know how the money's being used? And again, the legislation ties that money to research-based practices. And I think the best way to say it is that the funds, the choice of how to spend those funds is made by superintendents and school board members who know their kids the best and know their problems the best. And these resources enable them to make a choice about what's needed for those kids. That's another important point. The third important point is that Pennsylvanians, when you ask them, they want their kids to get a real world education and be ready for jobs in the real world. And these funds increase access to tangible improvements in education. Graduating high school with the reading and math skills you need to get a job, increasing access to career tech ed, boosting basic reading skills. These are issues that every lawmaker, Republican and Democrat, wants to see progress on. So it's important to think about those things. But the easiest way to talk to people, if you live in an adequacy district and you do a little bit of work and you find out how your district is spending this money, or you're from one, and you say, look, we hired a reading teacher. And that reading teacher came in and worked with the kids who were falling behind. And we now know that more of our kids are able to read on grade level than last year. The concrete stories of the difference that these funds made is the most compelling way for any of us to speak. So the numbers are important and you need to understand them and there's implications of them. But by and large, what you're saying is now House and Senate, you have a chance to build on what's been proposed. You have a chance to deliver in a way that has bipartisan support in this state. And I am here to ask you to do that by telling you a real story and or by making the point this increases choice, it improves local control, and it makes sure that every kid graduates ready for a world-class job with a real-world education. Now, one of the things I want to mention is if I said things too fast and you're like, I want to go to my school board meeting and say this, reach out to us. We'll help you. If you want somebody from PA Schools Work to come to a community event or a school board meeting or meet with your county commissioners, whatever it is, we will do that. So we have partners across the state and we are ready to help you tell your local story and make your local case.
Donna, thanks. And that's a great place to wrap up. It looks like we don't have any other questions in the queue. Just a reminder, we'll send an email this afternoon with all of the different resources that we talked about, contact information, or recording to the webinar in a PDF of the slides as well. Dan, Donna, anything else just to quickly to wrap up before we close out?
This is a fight. We need you in it. We're not going to win without you. So please, if you are here today, do what we're asking because it's the only way we're getting over the end zone. We can finish the job.
Well said.
Dan, Donna, thanks as always. We're lucky to have you. We appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining us. We know you're busy, and so we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Be on the lookout for that email. And please reach out if there's anything we can do, as Donna mentioned. Thanks. Everybody have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.